unable to influence the situation at all. The title of young lord within House Lulan was an empty one. In fact, people had completely disregarded and forgotten about him. Everything stemmed from being powerless. I apologize. I have been unable to help, Luo said. Zhang King shook her head as she lightly replied. Rest assured, even if turmoil engulfs House Lulan, I will ensure it is rebuilt before I hand it back over to you. Luo did not reply. He didn't really mind either way. Even if House Lulan were the mightiest one around, it was ultimately external strength. In this world, only personal might was absolute. If he could enter the king or duke stages at some point, all of these problems would disappear like a wisp of smoke. The two then entered their old home and had dinner. Immediately after, Zhang King excused herself and rushed off, evidently to make preparations for tomorrow. Luo did not disturb her. Instead, he spent 2 hours practicing the resonance arts before retiring to his room for rest. Try as he might, he couldn't fall asleep. When the clock struck midnight, he directly rolled off his bed and grabbed the suitcase before wrenching it open. He pulled out the mysterious, black crystal ball and carefully clasped it between his hands. Luo could feel his heart palpitating as it almost burst out of his chest in excitement. Father, Mother, just what did you leave behind for me? Luo lightly patted his chest as he spoke self-deprecatingly. There's no way you left behind a birthday cake you made countless years ago, right? He gulped. Chapter 6. Acquired Resonance. The black crystal ball with a mirror-like sheen allowed Luo to see his countenance within. A trace of anticipation, lashed with anxiety, was hung upon his gaze. He wanted to know just what sort of item would lead his parents to spend so much effort to squirrel away. Suwu, just how do I open this? Luo was doing everything he could to quash the feelings of anxiousness in his heart. Cautiously inspecting the ink-black and mysterious crystal ball, he finally decided to use the most direct method instead. He tentatively pressed his palms against its surface. Wang! At the exact moment his palms contacted the crystal ball emitted a slight shock. That originally shiny exterior liquefied and enveloped Luo's palms. At the same time, Luo could distinctly feel a sensation not unlike acupuncture, as though needles were piercing right into him, into his palms. As this happened, some of his blood was absorbed. The palms, which were covered with the black liquid, then began to radiate a bright light. Then, to Luo's surprise, 2 light apparitions gradually took form. Looking at the familiar silhouettes, Luo could feel a wave of nostalgia and yearning descend upon him. Dad, Mom, the male apparition was handsome, his body upright like a spear whilst clothed in white robes. He possessed an absolute charm and a warm smile. Yet hidden within was a lofty and immovable presence that would bend to no one. Just looking at him brought others an indescribable sense of comfort and safety. On the other hand, the female apparition was garbed in violet, her long hair elegantly pinned up, her 2 hands leisurely placed within her pockets. She, too, was of incomparable beauty and held an unparalleled, dignified demeanor. These were Luo's parents, Taixuan and Tan Tailan. As Luo stared blankly at the two, the apparition of Taixuan began to speak. "Ha, my little boy, now that you're seeing these imprints, I assume you are 17 already. I believe that by this point, we are long gone." Tan Tailan, who was smiling happily at the side, also began to speak. "Little Luo must have become even more handsome by now, right? Have any girls begun to court you in school?" Luo rubbed his eyes as he mumbled to himself. "Your son did not only become extremely handsome, he also became absolutely unmatched. Just who would dare to court me? Are you feeling full of grievances right now? Do you feel that nothing has gone right for you?" At this point, Taixuan began to chuckle again, as though he could see right through the frustrations in Luo's heart. His mom continued, "Perhaps because of the blank palaces within you?" At this point, Luo was shocked. By the time his blank palaces had manifested, his parents had been missing for years. Just how could they have known of his situation? "Little Luo, don't be surprised. We used some special methods too. Observe your body's situation long before your resonant palaces manifested. In fact, you even have 3 resonant palaces." Tan Tailan soothed him with a doting gaze in her eyes. Luo's jaw dropped. So it seems as though his parents knew of his unique situation a long time ago. Then, in this case, did his parents' disappearance have to do with this? Just where were they now? Were they still doing well? Why had there been no news since then? Little Luo, I would first like to tell you that just because you were born with blank palaces, it does not mean that you're crippled. In fact, based on what I feel, this is the strongest sort of constitution in this world. You don't have to feel dispirited at this, and instead rejoice. Lai Teixuan's words were too earth-shattering, leaving Lai Luo speechless. Dad, even if you want to console me, couldn't you do it in a less exaggerated way? Lai Luo lamented. The blank palaces had already hampered his ability to cultivate. Just what nonsense was he spouting about some mightiest constitution? Dad, just who are you trying to scam? Lai Teixuan had a wry smile as he explained. Your natural blank palaces cannot absorb or refine worldly natural energy. This has to do with the root of your power, and frankly, we have no solution for this. Since it's a blank palace, then just find some way to stuff something in, added his mom, with a beaming smile. Lai Luo was now wrinkling his brows in consternation. This was easy to say, but impossible to do. Resonances were determined from birth. Wanting to change this after being born was unheard of. He had even experimented with this idea, but to no success. In a normal situation, this would truly be undoable. However, ever since we discovered your situation, we have been working hard to find a solution. If you do your best, you're bound to succeed eventually. Indeed, the heavens did not disappoint us, and we finally found it. At this point, Lai Luo could distinctly hear the thunderous palpitations of the heart, and even his head felt dizzy as blood rushed to his brain in excitement. We poured through numerous ancient records and finally found a solution. This art is known as the acquired resonance godly forging art. It allows one to forge acquired resonances. At the same time, it allows one to integrate their blood essence and soul, along with the chosen resonance, into the forging process. The resulting acquired resonance can then be absorbed into your blank palace. Little Luo, your naturally endowed blank palaces may not necessarily be a bad thing. As natural resonances are too powerful and hard to control, we cannot pass the full art down to you. Instead, the acquired resonance godly forging art is a much better fit for you, allowing you to forge your path as you see fit. If you want an elemental resonance, then you can work in that direction. Conversely, if you want a beast resonance, then go ahead and do just that. In future, your 3 blank palaces will contain 3 carefully constructed resonances. At that point, you will be greatly superior to those with a natural resonance. Lai Luo's eyes shone bright like a diamond under light. The situation seemed salvageable. There were all sorts of resonances, and many people had no choice over the manifestation of their resonances. This was something that could not be changed. On the other hand, although he did not have any natural resonances, he had the benefit of flexibility and could essentially determine what sort of resonance he wanted. Little Luo, the acquired resonances produced by the acquired resonance godly forging art also have another benefit, Tantalon added. Although these were just apparitions that were left behind, Lai Luo snapped right to attention. Since they had said it was a good thing, then how could he dare to miss this? A standard natural resonance is usually only of one element. However, the forged acquired resonances from this art are not the same. They can have 2 attributes, one main and one supporting. These attributes can be fully customizable as you see fit. The power gained is as though giving a tiger wings. I've only ever heard of certain natural treasures that have allowed for one's natural resonance to gain a second minor attribute when taken. However, this effect is minuscule and is just a small additive layer of strength. This is completely different from your acquired resonances, which are forged with 2 attributes that are supplementary. The difference is worlds apart. Oh my gosh, this is just too awesome. Too great. Lai Luo was jubilantly celebrating as he clapped and jumped for joy. He could easily understand the preciousness of this ability. If he chose to forge a fire resonance and then supplemented it with a thunder resonance, the combination of fire and thunder would bring about a multiplicative increase in strength. At this point, he couldn't help but become emotional. It looked as though his blank palaces were truly more impressive than those natural resonances. Cough. Of course, nothing is ever so perfect. Although your acquired resonances have numerous benefits compared to natural resonances, there is one glaring disadvantage. The forged acquired resonances will not exceed the 4th grade. Lai Teixuan clarified with a sigh. Lai Luo was momentarily stunned by this revelation. A 4th grade? This did seem slightly inferior. Compared to Zhang Qing's 9th grade light resonance, there was a difference of more than half the scale. With such a stark difference in grade, it was very possible that the benefits brought about by the dual elemental resonance would not be able to bridge this gap. However, his hesitation was short-lived. His current situation was already as bad as it could get, so even a fourth-grade resonance would be considered decent. Lai Luo's mom spoke dotingly as she reminded him. Of course, you don't need to worry. Even though your acquired resonance grade might be low, you can also utilize acquired resonance arts to eventually improve them. Lai Luo was once again struck with yet another revelation. That was true indeed. This world contained many wondrous treasures and medicines that allowed one to increase the grade of their resonance. There was a particular profession known as resonance artificer. These people were able to refine and temper spiritual liquids and mysterious treasures that would improve one's resonance. And as a result, they were widely welcomed by all resonance cultivators. There were, however, certain constraints to using external means to improve one's resonance grade. There was usually a limit to the tempering process and, normally speaking, an improvement of a grade or two was the best possible result. In the case of acquired resonances, as the highest grade was 4th grade, refinement would lead to a possible peak of 5th or 6th grade. Is little Luo worried about the physical limitations of refining one's resonances? Lai Teixuan laughed as though he was reading Lai Luo like an open book. Huh? Seeing his dad's wide smile, Lai Luo's eyes widened, and he couldn't control himself. Could it be possible that this wasn't the end? This weakness could still be made whole. As Lai Luo greedily anticipated the next round of news, his mother let out a slight sigh and interrupted his father with a disgruntled expression. You idiot! You've just gone ahead and came clean with everything. Just what can I tell little Luo now? Huh! Lai Teixuan's expression changed as he hastily consoled her. My dear, I was in the wrong. Please explain the rest to our son, and I won't do it again. Please forgive me. Upon seeing this familiar sight, Lai Luo couldn't help but shake his head with a sigh. His dad's survival instincts were truly commendable. Was this something that had been beaten and ingrained into him? Brat, are you laughing at your father right now? That apparition seemed to know exactly how Lai Luo would react. Snorting with dissatisfaction, he immediately began to speak in a serious tone. You are still young and have yet to understand. I am definitely not afraid of your mother. It's just that my love for her runs too deep. As I've often lectured you, loving your significant other is the most important rule of this family. When you eventually get together with King, you will also have to obey this law. Do you understand? When Lai Luo heard those words, he couldn't help but let out a cold laugh. Whenever his father said those words, if not for the fact that this explanation was often accompanied by a sight of a reddened palm mark on his face, he would have almost believed in them. Yet when he mentioned King, Lai Luo could only sigh. King had been intimately raised by his mom and hence their personalities were similar, and he was often on the receiving end of a beating without him having a clue why. How would his life be in the future? With a heavy heart full of sadness, Lai Luo raised his head and looked at his dad. At this moment, it seemed as though their gazes could transcend time. It was as though he could finally understand what his dad was thinking. For a brief moment, this father and son pair could feel a truly fateful connection with their hearts. One of intimate sorrow. Lai Teixuan, can you stop standing there and making a fool of yourself? You're wasting my time. Lai Luo's mom enunciated with a single raised eyebrow, interrupting that brief moment of endearment between the pair. Without surprise, Lai Teixuan nodded eagerly, demonstrating that he had heard those words clearly. At the same time, Tan Tailan turned to look at Lai Luo, her tone turning gentle. The refinement limit is only applicable to natural resonances. This is because these external treasures, no matter how pure and pristine they look, inevitably contain some impurities at their core. It is the accumulation of these impurities that prevent a palace from completely sealing in the resonance's might. As a result, it makes it difficult to continue refining the resonance past 1 or 2 grades. However, little Luo, your blank palaces don't have this limit. Natural resonances have specific affinities, and thus external tempering materials will face some form of rejection from the resonant palaces. Your blank palaces have no affinities, meaning that they can accept anything. Thus, your resonances can continually be refined as they will not be rejected by your palaces. Although it will get increasingly difficult to refine your acquired resonances, there is a chance for you to perfect them. Hence, it's as I've said, your blank palaces could very possibly be the world's mightiest constitution ever. The perceived disadvantages are just a key to greater success. Luo could feel his heart roiling in waves. He had suffered greatly due to his blank palaces in these past few years. When he had first manifested it, he was unwilling to believe it and even felt angry. His frustrations and furious cultivation still resulted in him remaining powerless. In the end, he could only accept reality as it was. However, now, with his parents' words, these blank palaces were not useless. In fact, he might have the world's best constitution. This new information brought tears to Luo's eyes. Little Luo, for your first acquired resonance, we have already extracted some of your blood essence and a strand of your spirit soul and refined something for you. It is within this crystal ball. The acquired resonance godly forging art is also within, Tantalin explained. Luo could feel a warm current surging through him as he immediately opened his clenched fists. Dad, Mom, thank you. Let's go. I'm ready. Transmit this acquired resonance and the acquired resonance godly forging art to me. Let me finally gain the opportunity to be reborn and soar above others. At this point, Lai Taixuan's expression became solemn, and he became silent for a few breaths before speaking again. The last thing I want to let you know is that absorbing this acquired resonance is not as easy as you might think it will be. As the acquired resonance is assimilated, it will require massive amounts of blood essence. This is why we had to wait until you were 17 before allowing you to retrieve this. Only at this age will you barely be able to withstand the loss of your blood essence. More importantly, what you will lose is not just blood essence, but also part of your longevity. Once this acquired resonance is absorbed, you will only be able to live for 5 more years, unless you're able to break into the Duke stage and transform your body. Otherwise, that will be the end. This has been something that your mom and I have disputed for a long time. The price to pay is too great, but you, my boy, have grown up. So we have decided to lay the facts bare and let you make the choice yourself. Little Luo, will you choose to maintain the status quo and become a rich young lord? Or will you choose to assimilate with the acquired resonance and cultivate against the heavens, struggling to live while embarking on a path fraught with danger? If you choose the first option, then all you have to do is store the crystal ball somewhere and the previous process will revert. If you choose the latter, then reach into the crystal ball. The choice is up to you. But regardless of your decision, the two of us will always support you. After which, the two apparitions no longer spoke and merely stared at Luo with gazes full of concern and love. Luo, on the other hand, gradually eased himself into a sitting position, his eyes focused on the murky, black crystal ball with uncertainty laced within. Throughout the explanation, he had realized something. Since the benefits were so wondrous, why were there no drawbacks? It seemed that this was left for last. Now his choices were simple. Did he want to be a weak, little monster? Or a mighty, short-lived beast? Chapter 7. Indecisiveness. The room was so silent that one could hear a pin drop. The black crystal ball was emitting a faint radiance that reflected Luo's unsettled countenance. It was a strange sight. He was currently embroiled in an impossible choice. His parents' hard work had unearthed hope of a new dawn for his blank palaces. However, he had never expected that this hope would come with such a heavy cost. Luo would only have 5 years left to live. If in 5 years he could not enter the Duke stage and undergo a life-changing metamorphosis, then he would come to an unsatisfactory end. 5 years to become a Duke. He was only 17 now, and in 5 years he would be 22. Even after reaching deep into his knowledge, he had never heard of such a young Duke in the history of the Xia Kingdom. Exactly what sort of culmination of talent, opportunities, and effort would allow one to construct such a miracle? Luo did not know, and hence he could feel a huge sense of pressure envelop him. He even found it hard to breathe. The current him could continue to live a mediocre life. His parents had left behind House Lulan, which still possessed a decent amount of businesses. Even if he could not control any of it and gave it all up, he could still live the life of a leisurely young lord, free from any worldly worries. The path of the acquired resonance would place him on the edge, constantly struggling and making every second count. He would have to struggle and wholly strive, squeezing out every last ounce of potential, all to fight against the heavens and to eke out a shred of vitality, all just to barely survive. Two wholly different paths, just what should he do? Luo closed his eyes, his heart engulfed in turmoil. His mind flitted through numerous scenes. He thought of the strange gazes he received from others at the academy. People often like to say that a tiger had given birth to a dog. How could such illustrious parents give birth to a son with such poor abilities? He thought of the person with a pair of pure and beautiful golden pupils. Deep down, he did feel a sense of love and yearning towards John King. This he did not deny. However, John King's exceptionalism was attractive, and she had a horde of other fans. Such an elegant and unparalleled lady could only be matched by a man of heroic and extraordinary temperament. This was only human nature, and there was nothing shameful about it. When they were young, Lai Luo and John King often competed in all sorts of areas. However, due to all sorts of different reasons, Lai Luo lost more than he won. As the two of them grew older, such interactions lessened. This was especially noticeable after their palaces manifested. Lai Luo knew that the gap between the two had only widened, transforming into an uncrossable chasm. John King had also begun to reduce their friendly competitions from that point on. The encounters over the years looked as though they had smoothened Lai Luo's edge over time, as he seemingly became much more mellow. Only he knew that deep down, his desire to win and compete had never diminished, only further stoked ablaze by his apparent weakness. The reason he was willing to challenge John King was not simply because he was coerced; he wanted to do so. In a normal situation, even catching up to John King, who had already left him in the dust in the cultivation race, was as impossible as surmounting the heavens. However, there was a brief sense of hope now. Was he going to give up on this hope? His real answer was that this was impossible. Lai Luo's eyes flashed open, and a trace of sharpness could be seen in his gaze. He stared at the apparitions of Lai Teixuan and Tan Tailan before saying, "Dad, Mom, I have always had a wild heart. However, those who know of my condition would laugh at me if they heard this, as if I don't understand my own situation. I'm not only interested in catching up to Sister King, I want to surpass her. And not just her, I want to surpass the two of you." A grin hung on his face, displaying his pearly white teeth. "I dream that in the future, people will not recognize me for being Lai Teixuan and Tan Tailan's son. Instead, I want others to see you and know you as Lai Luo's parents," he chuckled. "Dad, Mom, I am very thankful for this gift you have left for my 17th birthday. Rest assured, I will not let you down. All I have to do is reach the Duke stage in 5 years. No biggie. I, Lai Luo, accept this challenge," as he made his final declaration. His eyes lit up with resolve, and he no longer hesitated, reaching out with his palm, lightly pressing them onto the black crystal ball. Wing, the black crystal ball responded brilliantly, and Lai Luo could feel a piercing pain transmitting through his palms. It was as though countless needles were piercing into him. At the same time, the black crystal ball began to shatter, and within its interior quietly lay two objects. One was a black-colored jade slip. As expected, this ought to be the instructions to cultivate the acquired resonance godly forging art. The other item was mysterious-looking. It looked like a liquid and yet seemed to be an illusory item made of flowing light. It was azure in color and seemed to be emitting minute rays of sacred light. Lai Luo's gaze was affixed onto that illusory liquid object. He knew that this was something that would change his destiny. His parents had spent blood, sweat, and tears to refine this acquired resonance. Additionally, by merely setting his eyes on this strange object, Lai Luo could feel a sense of compatibility with it from the depths of his soul. It was as though this was something that had always belonged to him. His parents clearly weren't lying when they said that this acquired resonance was crafted from his own blood essence and spirit soul. The compatibility between man and resonance was instinctive. Ah! Just as Lai Luo was completely enthralled by the mystical acquired resonance, a complicated sigh echoed from behind him. Lai Luo raised his head and saw that his dad's apparition had begun to act again. The expression on its face was clearly filled with complications. "Little Luo, it looks like you've made your decision," Lai Teixuan unhurriedly said. "As your dad, your choice does make me feel a little sad. However, from the perspective of a man, I feel relieved and proud of you. Your future path will undoubtedly be full of danger and peril. But as the son of Lai Teixuan, how can these obstacles faze you?" His mom's eyes were also splashed with a tinge of wetness. It seems that when they had left these apparitions behind, they had already predicted this outcome. Perhaps this feeling was also unbearable for her. As a mother, she found it hard to accept that her child would only have 5 more years of life. Yet she did not dissuade him, as she knew that this decision was for Lai Luo to make. Furthermore, he had clearly made his decision, so she would do everything she could to support him and believe in him. "Little Luo, since you have chosen your path, let Mom tell you exactly what sort of acquired resonance we have refined for you. Hearing his mom's words, Lai Luo perked up. Your dad and I experimented with this acquired resonance countless times before finding the most compatible treasures to forge it. This is a fourth-grade water resonance supplemented with a light resonance. Lai Luo was a little shocked before he gave a bitter smile. Wait, why a water resonance? Amongst elemental resonances, there weren't elements that were better or worse than one another in general. However, there were differences when it came to practical uses. If one was interested in power and penetrating strength, fire, thunder, and metal were definitely the best in class. Water resonances were usually more nurturing and defensive in nature. It was a more flexible sort of element. He had never imagined that his acquired resonance would be one that was more on the side of soft and yielding. Haha, little Luo, you must surely be thinking that a water resonance is soft and weak, something that runs contrary to the strength you wish for in your heart. Don't underestimate the might of a water resonance. Although they might initially be more feeble in terms of sheer destructive ability, its affinity for vigorous, sustained attacks is unparalleled and will allow you to grind down any other element. If you are able to exhibit the strengths of the water resonance, it will not be any weaker than other elemental resonances. Furthermore, your water resonance is not a normal one. It also has the power of a light resonance supporting it. If you are able to fully utilize the power of the two, the final result will definitely exceed your imagination. Of course, your parents did not just give you a water light resonance for no reason. There are two more important reasons for this. You will lose a large amount of your blood essence and a large portion of your life during your first absorption of a acquired resonance. It will inevitably bring about grievous injury to you. Water resonances are gentle, and this water resonance's power will nourish your injured body, allowing you to recover quickly. It was as though Lai Luo had been enlightened, so this was the reason why. In terms of recovery prowess, a water light resonance would definitely be top tier in terms of healing. Then what's the second reason? Lai Luo asked curiously within his heart. Not before long, his dad continued to explain. The second reason is that we hope you become an amazing resonance artificer to supplement your future cultivation. Do you remember the fundamental requirement to become a resonance artificer? Lai Luo paused momentarily. Being a resonance artificer requires one to either possess a water or light resonance. When it came to cultivation, there were naturally numerous auxiliary professions that arose to support it. A resonance artificer was just one of many. They were able to refine and improve the grade of one's resonances with the usage of magical treasures. There were also alchemists. However, those required one to possess a wood or fire resonance. There were also resonant artifact crafters, those who could craft resonant artifacts used for battle. This required metal, fire, or earth resonances. Resonance artificers and alchemists were similar in many ways. The key difference was that one improved the grade of their resonances, while the other directly increased resonant power. Water and light resonance cultivators had purifying powers, which was the key reason why they were ideal for becoming resonance artificers. But why do I need to become a resonance artificer? Lai Luo was a little unconvinced. Just as he asked that question, Lai Teixuan's voice once again continued his explanation. That is because you have a blank palace. You're able to undergo unlimited refinements of your resonance grades. If you become a resonance artificer, you will gain a deeper understanding of the process and your own palaces, allowing you to strive for perfection. Additionally, other resonance artificers either only possess a water or light resonance. Your water-light resonance power, on the other hand, contains two elements that can mutually support each other. This is unheard of. If you don't become a resonance artificer, it would be a waste of a heaven-bestowed talent. The spirit liquids and purifying lights you produce will clearly outclass any made by any other resonance artificer. Tantalan then coyly covered her mouth and laughed. Little Luo, this is a backup plan that your dad and I have left for you. If House Lulan has been squandered to destitution by you, you'll at least have a set of skills that will allow you to survive. Lai Luo's jaw dropped at his parents' plan. In the end, he could only shake his head. He was absolutely speechless. He could only say that his parents had planned for every contingency. Even the profession they had in mind for him had been picked to capitalize on his first acquired resonance's strength. However, little Luo, do keep in mind that this first acquired resonance is just the initial step. Your dad and mom were able to help you refine it with your blood essence and spirit soul. The processes of creating your second and third resonances will be increasingly complicated. You will have only yourself to rely on to discover the route ahead. We recommend that you break into the resonant master stage before searching for a way to craft your second acquired resonance. We have left some possible suggestions on the paths you can take for it as well within the Jade. Our experiences have also been recorded for your reference. The acquired resonance godly forging art within this Jade will only allow you to craft a second acquired resonance. The complete method to craft the third acquired resonance has been left in Zia City for you to retrieve when the time is right. At this point, Lai Luo noticed that the apparitions of his parents seemed to have dimmed a little. This led him to realize that this transmission was finally coming to an end. Dad, Mom? Lai Luo couldn't help but to reach out and grab hold of the light apparitions, only for his hands to pass right through them. The two continued to look at him with gazes that were full of love and doting compassion. Little Luo, it looks like things are about to end. Your dad and mom believe that since you have chosen this road, you will definitely succeed in breaking out of this 5-year limit. We know that you worry for us, but rest assured before we meet you again, nothing will happen to us. Lastly, little Luo, you must remember that no matter how worried you are, you cannot search for us without reaching the Duke stage. Finally, the apparitions began to flicker and eventually faded into thin air. The entire room was once again subsumed in darkness and silence. Lai Luo continued to sit in front of the black crystal ball, his eyes watery and red. In the end, no tears fell. He rubbed his eyes and made a commitment. Dad, Mom, thank you for giving me everything. Please wait for me. When we meet again, I will definitely shock you and be your source of pride. He gradually composed himself, soothing the turmoil within. After which, he reached out towards this black piece of jade and stashed it away before his eyes landed upon the azure and sacred light-emitting object. From today onwards, I will be someone who has manifested a resonance. A blazing fervor could be seen within Lai Luo's pupils, along with excitement that had finally reawakened. Without hesitation, he reached out towards the azure-acquired resonance. When, at the moment of contact, he first felt an icy feeling wash through him, followed by an indescribable, acute pain exploding throughout his entire body. This acute pain intensified and built up, to the point that it completely overwhelmed Lai Luo's consciousness. His vision suddenly turned black and his entire body gradually collapsed onto the ground with a heavy thud. Chapter 8. A New Beginning Wing. In the depths of the darkness, Lai Luo was shocked awake by the sounds of countless slamming doors. He could faintly make out the shapes and colors of his familiar room as he struggled to open his heavy eyelids with all his might. This is what? In an awakened stupor, he began to mumble incoherently. To his terror, he suddenly noticed that his voice was much weaker than it was before. He once possessed the vibrance of spring, but now he seemed to be like an old man with his life candle faint enough to snuff out from a breeze. Lai Luo struggled to pick himself up from the floor, but even after half a day of struggling, he realized that he didn't even have an ounce of strength within his limbs. In the end, all he could do was resign himself to fate and remain lying on the floor for another half a day. Only then did he recover enough strength to stand up and plop himself onto a seat beside him. "Young lord, are you well?" At this point, a female's voice could be heard. It seemed to be Kai Wai who was asking after him. Lai Luo coughed and replied, "I woke up a little late." "What's up?" "King instructed me to inform you that House Wulan's Council of Nine's Pavilion Masters are all here and for you to get ready." Kai Wai's soft and pleasing voice continued. "All right." Lai Luo glanced at a small crack by the window. The light that was coming through was especially resplendent. It was clear that he had laid around for the entire night. Hearing Lai Luo's reply, Kai Wai felt that things were a little strange. Why did he sound so feeble? Regardless, she moved on and continued with her tasks. Lai Luo then shifted his gaze to where he had placed the black crystal ball the previous night. To his surprise, the black crystal ball had vanished into thin air. There were just a few pieces of ashes remaining on the floor. It seemed that the black crystal ball had engaged a sort of self-destruct function, completely erasing all traces of its existence. Following which, he decided to take a glance at the mirror to have a look at himself. However, what he saw caused his expression to change uncontrollably. The man in the mirror had an alabaster white complexion. This color would make one assume that all the blood within his body had been sucked away. What was most noticeable was that his once raven black hair had turned a mix of gray and white. It was clear that the loss of his blood essence had brought about massive changes to his physiology. Lai Luo stared blankly at the white-haired youth in the mirror and he spat out his thoughts. It seems that I've become even more handsome. Finding joy even in the darkest times, Lai Luo continued to muse. It seems that I've lost more than half of the blood essence my body has stored up over the past 17 years, all to absorb this acquired resonance. The sudden loss of his blood essence had resulted in a situation where he felt exceptionally weak. Just the act of taking a few steps made him feel dizzy. On top of that, he could also feel an indescribable emptiness within him. This was not a matter of the heart, but rather the loss of his longevity. Lai Luo pursed his lips. From this moment on, did he only have 5 years of life remaining? This would truly force one to feel the pressure of time ticking. He exhaled deeply and closed his eyes. It was time to understand his new body. He could perceive that where there were previously 3 blank palaces, there was now an azure light being emitted from his first palace. It continuously emitted comfortable and gentle rays of power that were gradually absorbed by this dried-up body of his. Lai Luo's mind was solely fixated upon the azure blue resonant palace. Although he had mentally prepared himself for this sight, actually witnessing it overwhelmed him with emotions. The acquired resonance assimilation was a great success. On this day, his issue of a blank palace had been resolved. Furthermore, his previously unwanted and troublesome blank palaces had turned into a wondrous opportunity for him. Opening his eyes, he could feel the worldly natural energy all around him, with 2 particular types of energy naturally attracted to him. They were water and light resonance power. In the future, he would be able to absorb these 2 energies for himself, turning them into his own resonant power. Till then, he would have to cultivate some energy cultivation arts. This was not a huge issue, because House Lulan possessed a strong foundation and hence had stockpiled numerous types. As Lai Luo pondered over his future, he gradually stood up, took a shower, and changed to a clean set of clothes. After changing, he reassessed himself in the mirror once again. I might be looking a little haggard and with a head of grayish hair, but damn do I look even more handsome and irresistible than before. Lai Luo muttered as he gave a radiant smile. Lai Luo, your new life awaits you. Meanwhile, within an old manor in the city of Southwind, although it seemed a little deserted, today's atmosphere was rare and solemn. Numerous guards were patrolling the premises surrounded by layers upon layers of sentries. Within the main hall, the atmosphere was similarly somber. It felt hard to even breathe. The spacious hall was furnished with 2 opposing rows of seats. In the middle of those 2 rows was a pair of seats, one still empty, whilst Zhang King occupied the other. Her serene gaze was tinged with coldness. Her golden pupils indifferently swept across the hall, occasionally flitting towards the row on her left. Within that row was a group of 4, all exuding roiling waves of energy. The strongest aura came from the one sitting at the head of the row. He looked to be a youth of around 27 or 28. His features were ordinary, nothing outstanding. His eyes were deep and his nose was long and narrow. On his right earlobe hung a sword-shaped earring that glowed with a faint, cold light. His expression at this moment was extremely warm and a smile was on his face, making it easy for people to have a good impression of him. However, Zhang King was extremely familiar with the person in front of her. He was not some sort of benevolent individual. In fact, ever since she took control of House Lulan, he was the one responsible for causing her all sorts of impediments. This was Lai Teixuan and Tan Tailan's disciple in name, an influential figure of House Lulan, Pei Hao. The 3 sitting below him were 3 pavilion masters of the Council of 9. Sitting right across their row were the other 6 pavilion masters of the Council of 9. Out of the 6 of them, 4 supported Zhang King, whereas the last 2 were neutral, supporting neither party. One glance at the way the rows were positioned made it abundantly clear just how turbulent the undercurrents of House Lulan had become. Without the 2 supporting pillars, Lai Teixuan and Tan Tailan, the foundations were easily swayed by the elements and changes. It had been silent for quite some time, accompanied by the reverberating sounds of tea sipping around the hall. As though it was prearranged, the head of the left row, Pei Hao, suddenly placed his teacup on the table with nary an extra amount of force. The clear, crystalline ringing of the cup echoed around the hall, immediately causing the peaceful atmosphere of the room to come to a halt. Pei Hao raised his head and glanced at Zhang King whilst smiling. Dear junior sister, everyone has been waiting for almost half a day. Why has the young lord not arrived? Even though he is the young lord, Everyone knows that we are here to decide upon the matters of House Lulan. I have to remind you that when the masters were around, everyone was punctual. This demonstrates his lack of regard for us." As he spoke, the expressions of the pavilion masters of the Council of Nine were varied. Some were unchanging, some frowned slightly, while the rest murmured in a soft tone. John King apathetically replied, "Why have I never seen you exhibit so much patience when the masters were around?" Then, Pei Hao's eyes narrowed into a line as he smiled. "Apprentice sister, the future waits for no one, and we have to move forward." Pausing, he stared to look at the rest of the hall before continuing. "Since the young lord is late and has not shown himself, I recommend that we proceed and not waste any more time. In any case," at this point, he had an exasperated smile on his face, "we all understand his situation. In fact, it's probably for the better that he's not around. Why not let him rest peacefully?" Within the hall was a myriad of different expressions. Other than Zhongking, no one else had spoken since the beginning. "Since no one has any disagreements, let us begin." Pei Hao continued to smile as he waved his hand, indicating that a decision had been made. Zhongking had an icy countenance at this point, but just as she was about to speak, cacophonous laughter rang from behind the beaded curtain in the room before the hall. "Senior Pei Hao, it's been quite a few years since we've last met. You seem to have become somewhat tyrannical. I suppose if my parents knew of how outstanding you have become, they would definitely have appreciated you a little more." As the laughter rang out, the beaded curtain lifted and a slender and handsome youth strode in with a smirk on his face. When everyone in the main hall saw that face, their bodies couldn't help but to shake involuntarily as everyone reflexively stood up as though conditioned to do so. That face was exceptionally similar to the one they respected from the depths of their hearts. Even Pei Hao's silly smile had stiffened for a brief moment upon his entrance. His body seemed to have bent slightly, and at the moment he was about to stand, his heart calmed down and he saw him for who he was. The person in front of him was not one of the two masters. This was just a blank palace cripple. To regain order, he quickly raised his hand and crushed the teacup in front of him. A crisp and clear sound blanketed the room when the entire teacup turned into dust. This seemed to have awakened the 9 pavilion masters from their stupor, and they quickly composed themselves. Following which, embarrassment could be seen scrawled all over their faces. The 3 pavilion masters on Pei Hao's side immediately took their seats. The remaining 6 pavilion masters hesitated for a brief moment before walking over to offer their respects to Lai Luo. "Greetings, young lord." As they focused more closely on Lai Luo, they noticed that despite him resembling his parents in style, he did not possess the same awe-inspiring momentum. In short, he was still too young and immature. Although that illusion of grandeur only happened for a split second, it seemed as though they could no longer remain as calm as before. What made them feel the most surprised was Lai Luo's head of gray hair. Even Zhongking was astounded by Lai Luo's new hair color as she scrutinized him. "This brat was clearly just fine yesterday," Lai Luo reciprocated the greetings to the 6 and then glanced at the immovable Pei Hao, who was still rooted into his seat. "Even though it's only been a few years since we've met, it looks like you've changed into a completely different person, Senior Pei Hao." Everyone within the hall could understand the implied meaning behind Lai Luo's words, causing the pavilion masters' gazes to light up. In the past, when Lai Teixuan and Tan Tailan were still around, Pei Hao would smile warmly and treat Lai Luo gently, like a loving elder brother. He would often even spend time racking his brains for appropriate gifts for Lai Luo. Unfortunately, no one, not even Lai Luo's parents, could have ever expected that this perennially respectful disciple would suddenly bare his fangs and reveal his true personality in the years they were gone. Pei Hao replied with that ever-smiling face of his as he observed Lai Luo. "It's been a while. Little Luo seems to have aged quite a bit," following which, he paused and then frowned seriously. "Though why is it that you've become so pale and your hair has turned white? It looks like at the rate that you're going, you barely have much longer to live." Chapter 9, Council Meeting. Pei Hao's voice resounded throughout the hall, causing the atmosphere to freeze immediately. Who would have expected that this once amiable and friendly man would spout such poisonous and vicious words? Even though Lai Luo's complexion was indeed pale and sickly, one didn't have to go so far as to curse that the person was doomed to die. No. The 3 pavilion masters beside Pei Hao clearly looked awkward in reaction to this chain of events. However, they did not speak and just continued to stare at the floor, as though the tiles were the most fascinating objects in the world. The other 6 pavilion masters, on the other hand, were clearly enraged. Pang! Another large shock echoed throughout the room, surprising all. When they looked over, they saw that John King's jade-like palm had slammed against the table, an absolutely icy expression on her face. Yet before John King could speak, Pei Hao immediately patted his mouth and laughed. Sorry, I spoke out of turn and accidentally shot my mouth off. I hope little Luo won't fault me for my accidental transgressions. Lai Luo glared at Pei Hao as he sized him up before also breaking into a smile. Although he was accustomed to seeing the two-faced reactions of numerous people in the past few years, those were all outsiders. Pei Hao was someone who had been saved by his parents, and it was not an exaggeration to say that he had been given a new lease of life. Without Lai Teixuan and Tan Tailan, Pei Hao would probably have had his 4 limbs broken by that family. He offended and thrown into the sewers before being left for dead. Where would he even have the opportunity to attain all that he had now? Everything that this Pei Hao had revealed demonstrated a complete lack of gratitude for Lai Luo's parents. On top of that, he even harbored a considerable grudge. This led Lai Luo to sigh. His parents may have been wise and brilliant over the years, but even then, they were human and had made a mistake. No worries, this is just your true self leaking out. What is there to be offended about? To be frank, even if I were, what could I do about it? Hence, I won't say any superfluous words here. Lai Luo shook his head and took his seat in the middle of the 2 rows. Pei Hao's face was full of mirth as he casually spun a thumb ring around his finger. He didn't seem to have taken any offense or become enraged at Lai Luo's mocking words. There was no need to. It was as Lai Luo had said. Even if he was offended, what could Lai Luo do? The House Lulan of today was no longer the house of the past. Without its 2 immovable pillars, there was no one who Pei Hao feared. A hopeless young lord was only useful as a puppet. If not for John King, he would very possibly have taken control of the entire House Lulan by now. Since the young lord is here, then I suppose the discussions can begin. Pei Hao turned to look at John King. John King remained expressionless as she apathetically replied, "Why don't you start? Why haven't you contributed even a single piece of sky gold from the 3 pavilions under your control to the house treasuries this year?" Pei Hao lightly sighed and replied, "The 3 pavilions under me are not doing well this year at all. Junior sister, you might have already heard that all 3 pavilions have mysteriously burned down. I suspect it is the doings of those external powers that covet our House Lulan's businesses. I tried my best to investigate the root of the issue, but alas, my investigations turned up with absolutely no result. Hence, I have nothing to contribute this year." Lai Luo merely listened quietly. Although Pei Hao's explanation seemed unbelievable and even comical, he did not interrupt. He understood that his words held no weight within House Lulan. The title of young lord was merely a superficial title in the eyes of everyone within the house. Thus, there was no need to speak out and court a rebuff. John King gave Pei Hao a deep and firm look before saying, "Is this your reason, Pei Hao?" Pei Hao casually smirked yet again. "Since junior sister wants a reason, then I will just give you a random one. Is there really a need to clarify certain things? Perhaps now that things have come to this, then let me make it clear to junior sister and the young lord. The 3 pavilions under me will not be contributing a single piece of sky gold this year. In fact, from today onwards, they will not be contributing anything ever again." Pei Hao's light tone landed heavily on everyone's ears. It was as though a peal of thunder had crashed through the room, absolutely shocking all. John King's body started to exude a cold air, and the very atmosphere seemed to have congealed. Her icy tone chilled the hearts of everyone in the room. "So it looks like you plan to defect?" Pei Hao grinned before replying. "I could hardly bear to leave House Lulan. It's just that there isn't an actual house lord right now. Who knows what or where this sky gold will end up if I pass it over. Perhaps when an appropriate house lord is finally chosen, I reckon it won't be too late to submit my tithes." A depressing atmosphere pervaded the hall. The other 6 pavilion masters had ugly looks on their faces. If this was truly the case, then House Lulan would become the joke amongst the 4 great houses. This was because Pei Hao had effectively already formed his own feudal army and demonstrated his intent to rebel and divide House Lulan up. "Pei Hao, do you plan to destroy House Lulan? Do you think you will benefit from its downfall?" A middle-aged man with a deep voice asked. His name was Lei Zhang, and he was a representative that supported John King. Pei Hao shook his head. As I previously said, I don't wish for House Lulan's downfall. Pausing for a few breaths, he looked over at the silent Lai Luo before continuing. Actually, I want to follow the rules. It's not impossible for me to contribute my tithes honestly, of course. I hope that the young lord can promise me a single thing in exchange. Lai Luo snapped out of his state where he was merely observing with his senses and his heart before affixing his gaze at Pei Hao. Curiously, he asked, I would like to know what sort of condition manager Pei Hao has in mind. Pei Hao's eyes shifted from Lai Luo to envelop Zhong King, taking in the sights of her icy and exquisite demeanor and her slender figure. A trace of fiery greed passed through the depths of his pupils. I hope that the young lord will annul the engagement with junior sister. After these words were spoken, the temperature within the room seemed to have dropped to absolute zero and everything froze. Lai Luo was not furious, but rather seemed to have turned expressionless. He had often discussed the idea of breaking up the engagement with Zhong King and had even come up with a promise for the future. Yet this was something between himself and Zhong King. The two of them were free to do whatever they wanted or say anything they wished between themselves. It was a personal relationship. On the other hand, Pei Hao had come up with such a ludicrous idea. Just who did he think he was? Bang! Just as Lai Luo's heart was turning cold and about to explode forth, a sudden influx of energy exploded outwards within the main hall. This energy was resplendent and bright, its radiance sweeping across all, bathing the entire hall with light rays. Immediately after, Lai Luo could indistinctly make out Zhong King being wreathed in light and shooting outwards, leaving a wondrous afterimage behind. She headed directly towards where Pei Hao was sitting. This sudden attack also took Pei Hao by surprise, and so he could only stare. In the blink of an eye, his own body was also wreathed in golden light. The sword-shaped earring on his right ear quickly disattached and swiftly, like a storm, transformed into a golden longsword. Surging golden resonant power coated the longsword, increasing its sharpness. Additionally, an inordinate amount of colorful energy channeled through it, looking like countless rainbows. Dang! The collision of metal and gold clashed, resulting in an explosive shockwave of energy. At the same time, all of the furniture within the hall was blasted into pieces. The 9 pavilion masters immediately acted and dissolved the remnant energy, trying to observe the aftermath. All they could see was 2 silhouettes locked in a confrontation with swords brandished. Zhong King against Pei Hao. Zhong King was clutching an épée, a sword dripping with resplendent light. The light was bright enough to dazzle the eyes, and if one were to stare at it for too long, they would undoubtedly feel piercing pain in their pupils. Who would have expected that this normally refined and pure goddess would be able to produce such shocking amounts of power in the heat of the moment she possessed? Truly tyrannical light resonance power. On the opposite side of Zhong King stood Pei Hao, who was wielding a golden longsword. His body was emitting waves of golden resonant power that seemed unusually fierce and even sharp. This was metal resonant power. When the 2 swords clashed, resonant power exploded outwards, and even the floorboards were cracked to the point that patterns not unlike that of a turtle shell could be seen everywhere. Pei Hao, still unfazed, maintained a sweet smile. 9th grade light resonance. Its fame is well-deserved. Junior sister is just an early-stage earth fiend, but your resonant power is already so domineering. It's clearly not inferior to my late-stage earth fiend resonant power. Your metal resonance seems to have already been raised to the 7th grade. It looks like you have squandered quite a bit of the tithes meant for House Lulan, Zhong King coolly replied. Pei Hao used to have a 6th grade metal resonance, but during this particular clash, Zhong King could faintly feel that her opponent's metal resonant power had become even fiercer. Raising a 6th grade to a 7th grade would require a significant amount of spirit liquids and purifying lights. Pei Hao did not reply, and instead the two immediately burst out with even more resonant power, their swords savagely colliding for another blow. Dang! The energy generated from the clash blew both parties back a few steps. How presumptuous of you, Pei Hao! At this point, Lei Zhang and a few pavilion masters appeared behind Zhong King, their expressions a steely green as they chided. At the same time, the other 3 pavilion masters stood behind Pei Hao, their stances clear as they prepared themselves. The sounds of the battle could be heard from outside the hall. At the same time, chaos was everywhere outside as well. 2 waves of horses and men had rushed in, prepared to confront each other. Junior sister. Are you planning to let the entire Xia kingdom know of our internal strife? Pei Hao gave a wry smile. Zhang Qing's had an unchanging, cold expression on her face, her gaze emanating waves of killing intent. Pei Hao, if you don't wish to die, then swallow those words of yours back into your defiled tummy. No one can interfere in our affairs. You have no right to. Pei Hao mused in silence for a moment as he frowned. Junior sister, why are you acting this way? Isn't that engagement merely a burden for you? I know that you are very thankful towards our masters, but there is no need to be so committed towards Lai Luo. He just isn't a match for you. Cruel and unscrupulous dregs like you simply cannot comprehend what gratitude is, Zhang Qing insipidly replied. Pei Hao shook his head as he stared at Lai Luo. Lai Luo, it's best you smarten up. Otherwise, I will let you know the meaning of getting into trouble for hoarding a treasure. House Lulan is merely just a decoration to you. Junior sister, on the other hand, is a talented genius and is something you do not deserve to have. Believe me, if you want to imprison her with the gratitude she owes your parents, then you will eventually bring about a catastrophe to yourself. Lai Luo calmly replied, unfazed by his maddened words, you're trying to say that I should let go of both House Lulan and Sister King. If you're smart enough, then that is exactly what you ought to do. Pei Hao nodded before he continued compassionately, I am doing this for your own good. If you don't have any power, then you ought to curb your greed. This way, you might still have a way to become a rich and idle man. Lai Luo smiled and replied, Pei Hao, aren't you worried about what will happen to you when my parents eventually return? Pei Hao's pupils shrank slightly, and the expressions of the three pavilion masters behind him turned grave. In the end, Pei Hao shook his head. Lai Luo, you should not hold on to such sad and naive hopes. Based on what I've heard, I'm afraid my masters will no longer be able to return. As he looked at Lai Luo, he gave a sympathetic sigh. Hence, your pillar of support is gone. Are you any different from me when I was powerless? No, in fact, I doubt you could even match up to me at my worst. Even at my worst, when I had no support and was poor and destitute, I still possessed some potential. You, on the other hand, you have nothing. Chapter 10. White-Eyed Wolf. Pei Hao's harsh words were just like a sharp blade, cutting straight towards the heart. These words infuriated the pavilion masters who were siding with Zhang Qing. At the same time, they couldn't help but to look over at Lai Luo. What was most surprising was that he seemed to be completely indifferent to those words. This led them to heave sighs of relief and at the same time taste a tinge of regret. This young lord may have been cursed with a blank palace, but his heart was unyielding and firm, something commendable considering his situation. Pei Hao also noticed that Lai Luo was unfazed by his words, making him feel astonished. Perhaps this was not unexpected. Lai Luo had changed over these past few years. Perhaps he had already accepted the gravity of the situation. Are you done blabbering? Lai Luo retorted calmly. Pei Hao returned his reply with a dull smile. Actually, I've been quite baffled by this series of events. My parents have clearly lavished you with their favor. Why are you acting as though you possess an immense grudge against them? Lai Luo asked. Pei Hao paused for a moment in thought and replied, my masters have indeed treated me well, yet they have always known what I truly wanted. To become a full-fledged disciple, not just a mere disciple in name. For this goal, I labored for House Lulan endlessly, and what did I get? They never so much as opened their mouths to accept me. Can you understand how many times I've anticipated this reward, only to be disappointed? Lai Luo laughed. Is this what it means when one says if you provide too much help in a time of need, the person becomes reliant on you instead? In retrospect, what my parents did was right. With your ungrateful and vicious personality, it would be akin to inviting a blind and vicious wolf into our home. Imagine if you had become an actual legacy disciple. Just what more would you have done? Giving you the position of an actual disciple would only have amplified your wild heart, making it even easier for you to take control of House Lulan. Pei Hao shook his head to disagree, unwilling to further quibble with Lai Luo regarding that. It looks like you aren't interested in my proposition, then. Lai Luo shook his head. Stop wasting your effort. This marriage agreement is something between Sister King and I. It will not change based on your threats. Hearing his reply, Pei Hao sighed lightly. Lai Luo, greed will only lead to your reckoning. This is no longer the past. You no longer have any capital here. Lai Luo's gaze was affixed on Pei Hao. Despite Lai Luo having a much weaker aura compared to Pei Hao, his fervent gaze possessed something that led Pei Hao to feel mildly uncomfortable. I will redirect the same words back to you. As he spoke, Lai Luo's expression became dead serious. Pei Hao naturally laughed. Lai Luo, do you really believe that junior sister will always be there to protect you? How childish and naive. Since you don't agree with my suggestions, let's leave it at that. From now on, it's as I said. The 3 pavilions under me will no longer contribute a single tithe to the house. Similarly, any commandments made will not be implemented, depending on my mood. The expressions of the 6 remaining pavilion masters within the hall gradually turned frigid. 2 of the 6 were still trying to stay neutral. However, if Pei Hao truly wanted to carve apart House Lulan, their interests would also inevitably be affected. If this was the case, they would unfortunately only be able to obey John King's orders and suppress the other 3 pavilions and pavilion masters. If things were to escalate to that point, House Lulan's dirty laundry would indeed be aired to the public eye and all of the powers within the Xia kingdom. What? You wish for me to show my hand? Pei Hao could feel their cold gazes bearing upon him as he chuckled, looking at Pei Hao's jubilant expression. Lei Zhang and his fellow pavilion masters held themselves back in fear of the consequences of aggravating this beast. What was true in Pei Hao's previous exchange with Lai Luo was that his contributions to House Lulan had not been minor. When House Lulan was ascending through the ranks, he had exerted himself greatly, reaping the lives of numerous strong foes. Pei Hao had even become a late-stage Earth Fiend. Other than Lei Zhang, who was a middle-stage Earth Fiend, the rest were only early-stage Earth Fiends. In this group, perhaps only the 9th-grade light resonance-wielding John King could be his match. Most importantly, Pei Hao wasn't just a single individual. He possessed a veritable army and 3 pavilion masters on his end as well. If all hell were to break loose, it would announce to the world House Lulan's internal strife, and the house's position within the Xia kingdom would become even more untenable, to add insult to injury. Everyone, my aim here today is not to engage in meaningless gossip. What I wanted to do was find a solution that would allow House Lulan to continue to stand tall within the Xia kingdom. If junior sister is willing to annul the marriage, then I'm willing to work together to bring House Lulan towards a new era. Pei Hao's gaze flitted around the group with his ever-present smile. Now that things have come to this, I can only blame a certain young lord for being too greedy. It's time to settle things. At this point, he produced a medallion. On it was engraved the word Mo. This immediately set off a chain of different expressions amongst the group when they realized what it was. Is this Elder Mo's medallion? Lei Zhang quietly asked. In House Lulan, other than the 9 pavilion masters, there were also 3 respected ancestors holding high positions. They were the mightiest warriors of House Lulan, excluding the 2 house lords, and they were all heavenly dipper generals. Normally, these ancestors would not interfere in the mundane matters of House Lulan, only rising to the occasion when dealing with enemies that brought about existential danger. This was the agreement that Lai Teixuan had made with them. Specifically, Elder Mo was the strongest amongst the trio. Who would ever have imagined that the one who was most obligated to protect House Lulan would instead pass his authority medallion to Pei Hao? This was a clear indication of his stance. When Master first invited the 3 ancestors to join, he said that they possessed the power of supervision. Whoever is capable of obtaining the support of 2 ancestors and 4 pavilion masters by next year's meeting will have the right to become the House Lord of House Lulan. Pei Hao grinned. Hence, you don't have to be concerned about me tearing House Lulan apart. What I truly want is the complete whole. The entire hall was shocked. No one had expected this turn of events, nor for Pei Hao to raise this possibility. Judging from the current developments, he did indeed have the possibility to succeed. It was clear that he had long made preparations for the sake of today, taking effect immediately after the House Lords had disappeared. Pei Hao's gaze then turned onto the icy John King and then to Lai Luo at the side. So treasure this remaining year's worth of time. You might no longer have any affiliation to House Lulan after the next house meet. At that point, you will truly have nothing. After delivering his ultimatum, Pei Hao turned and strode away, the 3 pavilion masters in tow. With Pei Hao's departure, the frigid atmosphere previously found in the hall gradually warmed up. Yet the countenances of the ones remaining were tinged with sadness. Although they had made certain preparations for the house meet, when push came to shove, it had still caused quite a headache. What was commendable was Zhang King being able to remain cool and collected the entire time. She immediately reassured the 6 pavilion masters and delegated some important matters before letting them go. After which, silence descended upon the hall again. Lai Luo's eyes were fixated upon the floorboards until his view was filled by a pair of straight and slender jade-like legs. Only then did he snap back to reality and raise his head to look at the person in front of him. His gaze met Zhang King's, quietly watching him with her alluring, golden pupils. Even though you seem to be calm on the outside, you must be seething on the inside. Huh? Zhang King casually asked. Lai Luo gave a bitter smile. How can I not be angry? Pei Hao had treated him as though he was non-existent. Combined with the request to annul the marriage in front of the house, it was akin to being stomped in the face. However, your performance was admirable. You never lost your cool. Zhang King's dainty, red lips rose into a slight smile as she praised him. If only I was strong enough, I would have smashed him to a pulp on the spot and assisted my parents with some housekeeping matters, Lai Luo sighed. Staying calm. Wasn't this because he could do nothing else? At this point in time, Lai Luo gained a greater appreciation for the importance of personal strength. The young lord without his parents was worth nothing at all. He did realize that what was most important now were his blank palaces. Everyone thought that he was powerless and hence underestimated him. No one will ever have a smooth life. Exercising forbearance is a virtue, Zhang King explained. Lai Luo nodded in agreement. After experiencing today's housemeet, I now understand just how much trouble House Lulan is in. These 2 years must have been hard on you, Sister King. House Lulan's ascent to the top had been too rapid and a solid foundation had not been laid, resulting in the situation seen today. The moment the founders disappeared, the tower they had built was no longer stable. If not for Zhang King's 2 years of blood, sweat, and tears, perhaps the predators looking to tear the place apart would not only just be Pei Hao. Zhang King took a seat as she elegantly folded her alluring, white, and slender legs together. Don't take what Pei Hao said to heart. I will deal with him. All I need is a little bit of time. After saying this, killing intent could be seen emanating from her pure gold pupils. Since the two of us already had an agreement, then I will naturally carry it out. I will hand House Lulan to you in one complete piece. Thus, don't take to mind the problems faced by House Lulan today. What you need to focus on is Southwind Academy's final examination happening next month. If you are able to enter the Astral Sage College, all these problems will naturally resolve themselves, Zhang King gently said. At this point, she paused and tilted her head slightly and smirked. Of course, if you feel that your chances aren't too good, just let me know. I can treat your agreement as something you said at the spur of the moment and won't hold it against you. Lai Luo blinked before extending his hand. Pass me your hand. Slightly suspicious, she inspected the hand in front of her and paused for a moment. If it were some random stranger who had asked this of her, they would most definitely get a sword chopping towards them in return. Lai Luo, on the other hand, they did have a special relationship after all. Hence, she expressionlessly extended her own dainty hand, placing it within Lai Luo's palm. Lai Luo tightly grasped her small hand, that delicate feeling causing one's heart to sway. Perhaps it was due to her light resonance that her skin was an exceptionally sparkling snow white, like the most beautiful of jade, the downfall of a kingdom. However, Lai Luo suppressed his urges to fondle her hand gently, instead circulating a tiny amount of resonant power to be emitted from the palm of his hand. The previously calm Zhang King's expression changed swiftly when she felt that weak amount of resonant power come forth. Grasping Lai Luo's palm tightly with her slender fingers, she directed her consciousness towards Lai Luo's body. It was then that she discovered that Lai Luo's previously blank palace was now emanating an azure radiance. Zhang King was a little shocked at Lai Luo's smug look. This is a water resonance? You've manifested a resonance, her mind in shock. She only released her grip gradually after a long while. Is this what the masters left behind for you? Lai Luo nodded. Zhang King exhaled lightly before speaking. This seems to be the best piece of news all day. Although your water resonance is not of a high grade, it seems to have an unmatched sort of purity to it. Perhaps this is because the masters utilize treasures from the heavens and earth to craft it. Regardless, this is still an excellent beginning. It was clear from Zhang King's facial expression that her mood had improved. Even her slender eyebrows were no longer furrowed in thought. She even joked, "Congratulations! A, it looks like you finally made it a tiny step closer towards annulling the marriage agreement. But she was faced with a serious question now. Do you think his words about my parents were true? Lailuo smiled helplessly. John King's long eyelashes gently fluttered as she blinked. Although I don't know where he got his sources from, I personally feel that with how short-sighted he is, how could he possibly comprehend how mighty the masters are? Furthermore, I believe that the two of them have only been restrained temporarily. They are definitely fine and free of harm. Lailuo gradually nodded vigorously in agreement. I feel the same way too. Zhang King stood up and walked to the window. At this point, the sun's rays bathed her exquisite body with resplendence, each ray tracing her every movement, a truly soul-stirring sight. I will return to Xia City tomorrow. If you need me for anything, let Kai Wai know. She will remain in the Chanshu province for a while, helping to tidy up House Lulan's affairs after settling a few more matters. Zhang King turned to look at Lailuo. The sun had yet to set, and its light shrouded her perfect silhouette. Those golden pupils looked even more radiant with such a background, an eye-catching and unforgettable sight. And so, Lailuo, I hope that the next time I see you, you'll already be part of the Astral Sage College, Zhang King, with that ever-beautiful smile on her face, quietly murmured to herself.